One of the stories in the book that I really love was about Medellin, Colombia. And the point that you were making is, it was a city that was beset by violence and crime, and the sense that, the symptom sometimes is considered the cause. And development professionals, I think, would really appreciate this idea that, we have to understand what's the underlying issue. And so in Medellin, rather than just trying to lock up people or address the violence through policing, they actually look to the communities. Where's this coming from? And in the end, built escalators into the mountains. It's such a great story, and the city is totally transformed.
It is. As you know, they tried for 20 years the policing and the military solution to crime and the drug trafficking, and it didn't work. And so they really began to understand fundamentally that the problem was the disconnected communities who physically were disconnected because of their geography, with all of the favelas and poor people living in the hills and all of the middle class and wealthier people on the floor of the valley, and that's where all of the economic activity was. So they built a metro down the middle, but then they built gondolas going up to the hills, and in the most remote areas where they couldn't even get gondolas, they actually built escalators into the hillsides. And it is a transformed city. So this resilience building capacity and the dividends that it pays, their crime is down 90%, come not only from the shock sense that we think about, the cyclone or the hurricane or the earthquake, but it's also a way to respond to these slow burning developing stressors like poverty and crime or poor air quality. And we see Medellin just enormously transformed. Cohesive communities, better economic development, more tourism. This investment keeps paying dividends for them over and over again. So development professionals being asked to invest in transit systems, for example, which is what on the face of it this looked like, should be thinking about, does that transit investment connect communities or bring them further apart? Are you building diverse enough transit so that if one piece goes down, people aren't left stranded and remote? All of the things that, if you are taking this resilience building framework, you just think about differently.
Now, on that point, I'd love for you to expand on it for a second and tell us, two development professionals that are out there in the field running a project. They're working on an education project or a healthcare project. They get this book. Hopefully they read this book because there's so much that's useful in it. What should they do the next day? What should they do differently? What's your message to development professionals?
They ought to think like a chief resilience officer, which is a new designation and new role that we are providing for each of the cities in our 100 Resilient Cities Challenge, which will ultimately have 100 cities worldwide that will be working to build resilience. And the Chief Resilience Officer's role is to look at every investment across all elements of investment, across all sectors, through a resilience framework. So there are 5 characteristics that our development professionals ought to be thinking about folding into what they do. The first is the capacity for situational awareness. That is, really understand what's going on the ground and be able to change with changing information. The second is building in diversity or redundancy, as I talked about. That's very critical. So make sure that the system isn't brittle, just relying on one thing, because if that one thing doesn't go well, you need fallbacks. Integration is critical. You mentioned the development officer working on the education project or the health project. Yeah. And often, as we all do our work, we are so siloed in our thinking, we go deep. But resilience really requires integration across all of these domains, integration across all sectors. Don't leave out the private sector. They're a key feature of building sustainability into our development efforts. Don't leave out the communities in the decision processes. This isn't what you're doing for the communities. This is what you're doing with the communities, and that's an integration feature. They need to build in the capacity for self-regulation. Often we build these very tight networks, and so if one thing fails, it brings the whole system down. You can think about an electric grid, so if there's a failure, the whole system goes down. We need the capacity to sense where a piece goes wrong and then to island it or de-network it quickly. And we can think about that in our transit system, in our water or sanitation system as readily as in other systems.
Including
that
health
we
and
work
education
on,
too, right?
absolutely, in development. And then the fifth is adaptability. We need to build in the capacity to bend and not break, to fail safely rather than catastrophically. And that is a new way of thinking, and it is a resilience building way of thinking.
Well, I love the message. You know, I speak to students and others about development skills, and very often people say you've got to think like a CEO nowadays if you're a development professional. I love the idea you also have to think like a chief resilience officer.
You do.
And I think that's a really important message. So congratulations on a fantastic book.
Thanks, Raj.
Thank you for the contribution you're making to the world, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.